Are you interested in simplifying your homeschooling? Well, join me today for part 2 of a 3-part series with Emily Bradley of Easy Start Homeschooling, where we're going to give you some tips on how to do that.
I was all alone, but then you came along.
Well, welcome back. I am spending time with Emily Bradley, and she is the founder of Easy Start Homeschool and coaches homeschoolers. I think if you see our first discussion, we had our first episode where we talked about how she describes what she's passionate about and used the words freedom and joy. So we talked about that in relating to homeschooling. So check out that episode. And now today we're going to take a little time and talk about maybe what we might say simple priorities. I had asked Emily, what do you like, if you could share things with moms, what would it be? And one of the things she said was, I think I like to talk about simple priorities. Was that right?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome back. Once again, I just have to say she has 5 children, 2 to 13. So she's right in the midst of mostly the elementary ages. I guess your oldest son has just entered, was it 7th grade this year?
He did 7th grade, so now he'll be going into 8th grade.
Okay, so she's just heading into some middle school years. And that was partly why I wanted her to be on, was because she's right in the midst of dealing with elementary children. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. But today, okay, so explain to us simple priorities. You had said, I think we were going to talk about, begin by talking about what you teach, how you approach that with your young children.
Yeah, so I have a big philosophy. So when I'm coaching people to homeschool, one of kind of the mindset things that I work on is you are not your child's teacher. And so this is like a huge, like mind-blowing thing for a lot of people when I say, because they think when they homeschool, they're like, what does your homeschooling room look like? And I need to have a board, a chalkboard or whiteboard, or I need to have all these things, because the only thing they have in their mind is they were in school, there was a teacher, the teacher taught things. But I try to explain to people, it's much different. What a teacher does, presenting a concept to 30 people, 30 little people, is very different from an individual learning at their own pace and whatever they want to learn, And so I try to explain to people that you are more like a mentor or a guide as your child educates themselves, really. Because humans, what's amazing about humans is they naturally want to learn. We are a learning species. And this never goes away. And so I try to kind of divide academic learning into 2 major groups. So one group of subjects is things that we learn more like sporadically based on our interests. And this is like, when you think about adults, like if you're an adult, you think about the last thing you learned. Aaron's like, sometimes.
No, yeah.
If you think about the last thing you learned, it was likely that you watched a really interesting DVD or documentary, or you visited some place and you read all the little signs and you were like, wow. You read a book, you talked to a friend and had an interesting conversation, but it was not bit by bit, little bits of science were fed to you, but it was an immersive situation where you were like, oh, wow, now I know so much. Fast forward 2 years, do you remember all of that? Maybe, maybe not. So there are some subjects that are like this, where you can take a really deep dive and it'll be fascinating. And then it's kind of like, okay, that was good. And then there are other subjects that are more usually they're foundational to the other subjects, or they need to be built incrementally.
Right.
So, and those are the main things. And this is where we get like the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Right.
Right. The classic. I mean, people knew this. These were the 3 subjects. And so when my kids are in elementary, go ahead.
It only works because we haven't done spelling with reading, arithmetic.
Right.
Spell arithmetic.
That's right. Right.
Your kids are in elementary.
They are in elementary. Yeah, they are in elementary. And I have some level of confidence now because I have a middle schooler. And I'm like, it worked. The other day, my husband and I were looking at each other, and I was like, our son is almost done with his pre-algebra book, and I haven't taught him any math. You know, I mean, like when I say teach, I mean like, here's the lesson. It's the distributive property. Let's talk about it. You know, I've explained things when he's like, I don't understand what the book is trying to teach me. Or I've, you know, talked generally about addition, subtraction. He's like, what's parallel, Mom? I'm like, let's look it up together. But I more teach him how to discover these for himself, how the book is trying to teach him. And he's doing it. Anyway, he's learning, and it's his own initiative. Not that he's like, I want to learn math, I love it. I am telling him he has to do a math lesson every day, but it's been working. He's been building. So I teach my kids their letter sounds, which is a precursor to reading. I teach them how to read. I sit with them in kind of like snuggling, and I read aloud to them at bedtime, during the day, to get them to normalize reading, and to, when you read aloud to your kids and you're emotionally close with them and physically close with them, it's building those neural pathways, right? That reading is good. Reading is good. And so those things, and their brain is being wired that reading is good. And so when I see them start to take off on their own, when I say that's the end of the chapter, and they start taking the book with them to bed, you know, to read on their own, then I'm like, good, I've done it. And then I also make them do handwriting books, and I will sit with them and make sure they're forming their letters. But those 3 things, those are the building blocks. Well, reading and writing, building blocks to the other subjects. Math has to be built upon brick by brick, you know, for it to be used later. But then the other subjects, I don't see a lot of use in teaching that subject. Like, today I will teach you about state history, or today I will teach you about frogs. I don't know why, you know, but I do provide a lot of books for them, and I will select read alouds on all different subjects. And so that way I'm exposing them to different material. And then we do participate in a co-op, which provides kind of more structure, but then at home, I'm really emphasizing the basics and more character training, relationship building types of things, life skills. I view those as more like what I bring to the table, and I rely on the co-op to kind of, you know, keep those other types of subjects, you know, moving along as well.
And I would just add, because what you're saying is your kids are getting the foundational tools to be able to be lifelong learners.
Right.
So much of learning comes from reading. So much of learning comes from processing ideas, which happens through writing, right? Your writing helps you to organize your thoughts or to present an argument, or, you know, so you have to have those skills. And then even math, now you're set up to pre-algebra, not everybody could. I'm just thinking, as you're talking about math, with the elementary ages, absolutely you're learning those foundations. So you can just take a worksheet basically and do that, or do that skill, and they get it. But as you move into algebra, more students would need more, I think, guidance sometimes.
I agree.
I see a lot of that where then, because there's so many processes. But I think what you are saying that is really valuable for parents to hear is it's not lecturing.
Right.
Lecturing, you're not having these elaborate lessons. Really, you're sitting down with this material, and through conversation and doing it together and going through the process, you're building these skills.
Yeah.
And then what you said about the other learning about how when you're thinking beyond the 3 R's, particularly in an elementary age, everything is a learning, right? Everything is new.
Mm-hmm.
So I do like that idea of, again, having I like to have a theme or topic, and then you're reading about it, and we're creating and playing and, doing things that are all based around that topic. But again, that's where that reading and writing, you're practicing those skills with whatever that content is.
Yeah.
Now,
and I would say, in addition to that, I agree with everything you just said, but I would say there are children. I would say it's more what you're doing as a parent, especially with reference to the other subjects with, science, civics, government, the way you are modeling, learning and being interested and talking and discussion is much more important than the actual material. It almost does not matter what is in here with science and history. I mean, we all think there are basic facts that most people should know in our society that's different from culture to culture. But I think you do a great job as a homeschooling parent if you model that we're always learning, and we always should want to be learning, and you show your children how to learn, and you kind of mentor them and say, the show that you're watching is just not interesting, I mean, I wouldn't say this to my kids, but it's making you dumber, like
it's dumbing you down.
It is literally. I wouldn't say it like that ever to a child, of course, but I would say, look, this is so interesting. Almost like with the reading aloud, bringing them in and saying, look, guys, this is very interesting. My son, we watch sometimes news on PBS. We started bringing my son in, and it's a great way to talk about the news and the information. And, he's just starting to kind of get like current events, and he's hearing little things, and we're able to talk about it. But it's much more important that we are modeling, we're going to watch the news and here's how we relate to the news. Here's how we talk about it. Here's what's interesting, and that is more important than the fact that he actually knows what was said on the news. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the only thing I'm thinking is I'm just thinking about the listening audience thinking, well, what about science? What about history?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're saying that these are much more broader fields.
Yes.
And that we tend to, in education, it's not, certainly we can learn facts and learn pieces, and you want to. The more vocabulary and exposure you can give your children, just the better it is, the better they are equipped then with hooks to pick up things.
Right.
I just recently read a book on Ben Carson and and it was fascinating to me, just reading about how when he was very young, actually, he wasn't a good student. He found out he was almost not completely blind, but what's it called when you're legally blind? Mm-hmm. He got glasses, changed his life in the 5th grade. But he read so much. And he was exposed to so many ideas. And if something was interesting to him, then that conversation, that being exposed to more about it was engaged, which, like you said, connects all your mind and your neural pathways, and just gave him more exposure so that he was able then to grab even more of the things that were around him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we feel like, oh, they have to have this in this grade and this in this grade. And those broader topics, they don't, because really there's so much.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, to model how you process and as a family and how you make good judgments and discuss and just think. And then to be excited to keep learning, that it's not over. Okay, I graduate, I got that, check it off. Yeah, I like it. Now, you mentioned co-ops, and you said, when we were talking earlier, you said they just think there's so many benefits to co-ops. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think co-ops are great for homeschoolers. And when you talk about drawbacks to co-ops, what I've seen is a lot of people complain about co-ops. They say, no, forget about co-ops. And usually when you drill down, what has happened is they've had a bad experience with a co-op or two co-ops. But I think a co-op can be like a larger family. You just have to find the one that you belong in. But the benefits are just enormous. First of all, you've got like-minded people who are at least outside the system. And then you've got people who are more experienced than you, who can give you tips and say, oh, you just tips with your state's laws or things like that, connect you with people. They know about different resources in the states and which libraries will let you laminate for free, or just any random bits of information, these people can connect you with. Number two, there are, it's like an emotional support group for you as the parent doing the homeschooling, because you are in a unique role and you have a unique experience in our society because you're not on the normal path. And I think for the homeschooling parent, they need that like emotional connection and support. And then for the kids like other kids, I don't really dwell on like socialization. I think it's mostly, like a kind of a fake thing. Once you've been homeschooling a while, you're like, oh, they're fine. They see other kids. They like other kids though. And that's a real thing. So getting to see other kids, just having the group power of organization, because sometimes you have a baby and you're like, my homeschooling is just going to pot, but then there's another mom who's like, I'm organizing a field trip to learn about river cleanups. Can I come pick up your child and take them along? And you're like, yes, take them away, keep the learning going. And just that support is tremendous to have, to draw on the expertise of other parents if they're offering like classes or however the co-op is styled. It's just an enormous benefit, I think.
Well, and I think what you said too is it's messy. Community people are messy. And we talked in our first section of the episode, we talked about how the hard is good. And I think that's part of it, is you're in relationship with people and there's good, there's good sides and bad sides to that, but it's worth pushing through the relationship, working on those things. The benefits are just huge. Like you said, the help. And I do like the tidbits. Like, it's funny what you learn and go, wow, that's amazing. All right. So to finish up here, what would be some favorite supplementary things, or, if you were to tell someone, what would be a couple things that you'd say, okay, these have been great helps for my elementary kids?
Yeah. Number one thing I tell all parents of young kids who are not reading is the Leapfrog Letter Factory DVD. It's a DVD, or you can download it on Amazon or everywhere. I just think it's great. It has taught all my children their letter sounds. I'm in the middle of teaching my 4th child how to read. And I just think it's just one of the greatest things ever made. Letter Factory. I have used the How to Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons, or
Yep.
Yeah. There's actually like 3 or 4 other books that have similar titles now that I think are trying to draw people away from it. But if you get the right one, are you gonna link it or something?
I'll write that down. 100. I know what you mean. 100 Easy Lessons. It's the first one.
The big one. Yes.
And you're saying now there's some others that are trying. They
have a similar title, and I think people are buying it because they've heard that's good, but it's not the original. Anyway, get the original. It is not pretty.
Yeah.
Not fun, but it does work, and it is methodical and thorough. And when you go through it, you'll start to see how it's a science-based way of reading. And I know other people have done other things, but to me, if you don't know what you're doing, just do this when it's scripted. So that means what the parent is supposed to say, it's all written out, and you just read it and point. And the child, none of my children, I would say, have liked that book. They have not been like, let's do this ugly book. But it does work, and they are great readers. So it works.
I like how you said too, because I do know when you're starting and we all read, but you're like, I don't really know how I do this or how you learn. So I do think something scripted, something you can just follow and you're going to get the end result, is really takes a lot of pressure off and wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
And then you had told me earlier about one YouTube channel or whatever that you like.
I like Mark Rober. I think he's probably has like 100 million followers or something like that. I'm like, is like every 6th person in the world following him? I don't know. But he has some really great fun videos about science, and he really does teach them real science, and he kind of throws it in like potential energy. Let's just review what that is, and so yeah, he's great. There's a lot of supplemental, and there's stuff you can look online of educational documentaries on Netflix, and there's just so much out there. I use Saxon Math. I'm a big fan of Saxon Math for 3 main reasons. Number one, it's easy to find. So this was like used everywhere for decades. And I buy my kids books, the workbooks, like for when they're young elementary, I buy just the workbooks new, because they're pretty, like you were saying earlier, it's kind of self-evident, the math. It's like adding. Most parents can probably figure it out without the lesson book.
Right.
And then the textbooks, you can buy hardback, used for like $10.
Yeah.
They're just everywhere. I also like it because it's what we, as the parent, grew up with. Usually if we were going to remember how to do math, it's this way. And now this curriculums have changed in different ways that make it more difficult for parents to help their kids with math, because they're just explaining it in different ways. But Saxon is like, you could be like, okay, I can relearn this. I can remember the way they're teaching it. And also the resources. Yeah. So like you talked about how as kids get older and the math gets deeper, not every child can just get it.
Right.
And the resources available for Saxon Math are just enormous. There's probably 4 video lesson series that I can think of online. There's so much. And so I think for people, once again, if you don't know, I want this, just start with Saxon for those reasons.
And I know of Dive, which goes over the introduction. I know of Saxon Teacher. I think that's the one that I liked the best. And then there were a couple others that they were more expensive.
Nicole, the math lady. Art Reed has his own Saxon videos. So
Lots of resources. Well, Emily, thank you so much. Those are some great practical tips. And I do love the idea that it helps parents when they're thinking of these elementary age to think outside. It's not just stand up lecture. You can have a classroom, you can have a whiteboard. Those things are fun. But you're one-on-one, you're working with the students that you have. It's conversation, it's your life together, it's life skills, it's all of those other pieces. It doesn't have to be as formal, which makes it so stressful.
Yeah.
So that is really helpful. All right, well, we are going to end here, but join us for our next episode, and we're going to talk about obstacles and mindset. At least that's what I think. Of course, when we get there, it could be different. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and that it's helped increase your confidence in homeschooling. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and check out the Yes You Can Homeschool equipping course at thehomeeducatedmind.com. And until the next time, remember, yes, you can homeschool.